Well, thank you very much, Orit, and I would like to, my paper very much follows some of the comments Orit was making at the very end about the diversity of the Jewish community of Iraq. Yesterday we heard all about the Arabic-speaking community in Baghdad, but I'm now going to introduce you to a completely different world, the Aramaic-speaking Jews of the north of Iraq. Now, very briefly, something about Aramaic. Svi's already showed us some of the empires, but Aramaic was a very widely spoken language in antiquity. It was the lingua franca of the Achaemenid Empire in the middle of the first millennium BC, and continued to be the predominant language of the Levant and Mesopotamia until the rise of Islam, and then gradually Arabic began to replace Aramaic. But to this day, 4 islands of Aramaic have survived. These are generally classified into these 4 groups: Central Neo-Aramaic, Northeastern Neo-Aramaic, Neo-Mandaic, and Western Neo-Aramaic. Central Neo-Aramaic spoken in the Tur Abdin area of southeastern Turkey. Northeastern Neo-Aramaic was spoken in northern Iraq, southeastern Turkey, east of the Tigris River, and western Iran. Neo-Mandaic was spoken in the southwest of Iran, in Khorramshahr and Ahvaz. And Western Aramaic is spoken in 3 villages around the area of Damascus in Syria. Now, the Aramaic-speaking Jews speak this second group, the so-called Northeastern Aramaic, which is generally abbreviated to Nina. And it is a very diverse group. It's spoken by Jews and Christians in northern Iraq, southeastern Turkey, and in western Iran. Now, I should say it was spoken until the middle of the 20th century, because after the middle of the 20th century, of course, there were a lot of displacements of population, which I'll be talking about. Here, very briefly, is a map showing the location of these islands of Neo-Aramaic. Nina there, up in northern Mesopotamia. Now, the diversity of the Nina dialects, about 150 dialects, in northern Iraq and southeastern Turkey, can be interpreted as a reflection of the antiquity of settlement of the communities in these regions, which must have constituted the ancient heartland of Nina. The geographical area where Nina dialects are spoken today has now contracted considerably. Most of these dialects are now highly endangered due to a series of upheavals in the Middle East over the last 100 years. A conspicuous feature of the Nina group is a communal split between the dialects of Christian and Jewish communities. Dialects of these 2 communities exhibit considerable structural differences. This clearly reflects the role of communal identity in linguistic change. Such communal dialect splits between Jews and Christians were found even where Jewish and Christian communities lived in the same location, such as Urmi in northwestern Iran, Sanandaj in western Iran, Khoisanjak and Sulemaniyya in northeastern Iraq. The Muslim population of the Nina area, which is numerically and politically dominant, do not speak Aramaic, but rather Iranian languages, especially Kurdish, also Arabic or Turkic languages such as Azeri and Turkoman. There is therefore a 3-way linguistic split in the region, aligning with the 3 religious communities of Jews, Christians, and Muslims. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Nina-speaking Jews lived in thriving communities in villages and towns throughout the original Nina area. And here on the back, I show the main settlements of the Jews in this area who spoke the Nina dialects. These were in northern Iraq, southeastern Turkey, and western Iran. Some of the main settlements of Jews included the Iraqi towns of Zakho and Dohok, Ahmadiyya. Well, here we've got a picture of some the Jews of Zakho from the 1940s, and Ahmadiyya, or Ahmadiyya, as the Jews call it. That's to the west of the Zab, and also the Iraqi towns of Ruandus. This is an old photograph of the synagogue in Ahmadiyya. And then we have, there was a Jewish community in the town of Ruandus up in the mountains near the Iranian border. And here we have a picture of the Jews about the early 20th century. And also there was a settlement in Sulemaniyya, and also various settlements in eastern Turkey, such as Bashkale and Challa, and various settlements in the west of Iran, from Salmas in the far northwestern corner of Iran, northwestern corner of Iran, down the western borderland in towns such as Sakaz, Sanandaj, all the way down to Kerend in Karamshah province. In addition, there were small village settlements of Aramaic-speaking Jews across Iraq, some with very distinctive dialects, such as Betanure, up in near the Turkish border, north of Ahmadiyya. This is a photograph I took 3 years ago of the remains of the settlement. And also, this is the synagogue in Betanure, the ruins of the synagogue in Betanure. And also in the village of Rustaqa, up in the mountains near the Iranian border. Since the 19th century, several Aramaic-speaking Jews of the region emigrated to Palestine through religious motives. This emigration increased after the First World War in the first half of the 20th century due to the activities of the Zionist movement. In the early 1950s, after the foundation of the State of Israel, the emigration turned into a mass exodus. As a result, most of the surviving Aramaic-speaking Jews are now resident in Israel. It used to be thought that after the exodus, very few Aramaic-speaking Jews remained in northern Iraq, and that the few who did remain were mostly women who converted to Islam. In recent fieldwork in the north of Iraq, however, I have discovered that several hundred Aramaic-speaking Jewish families did in fact remain in the region and retained their Judaism in their homes, but were officially classified as Muslim on their identity cards, or merged with the Christian communities and were officially classified as Christian. Here I am standing in Arbil with the original Jewish quarter behind me with a couple of my students, and on my right is the head of the Jewish community in northern Iraq, who introduced me to many...
Don't say Kurdistan.
Well, Kurdistan, if you like.
Shame, really. We'll be very upset about it. All the description you say in Western Iran, Northeast...
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I can put slash Kurdistan, if you like. Yeah. So, but what's more important than the name is the fact that I discovered that there were many hundred Jewish families still in Kurdistan / northern Iraq, and it was that they remained as crypto-Jews who were not actually allowed to openly practice, but they were registered as Muslims or Christians, but they still retain their Judaism in their homes to this day. This is something which is not normally known. So, all the Jewish Neo-Aramaic dialects are now on an inexorable trajectory of extinction as living vernaculars within the next couple of decades or so. Indeed, some have recently become extinct. The communities who spoke the various dialects in their original location were of varying size. Some dialects were spoken only by a handful of Jewish communities, and it is these that have now become extinct or are in particular danger of extinction. The dialects that were spoken by larger communities are in a more healthy state, but every year the number of good speakers dwindles and the opportunities for systematic linguistic documentation vanish with them. There are only scant sources for the history of the Aramaic-speaking Jewish communities in northern Iraq, Kurdistan. The communities almost certainly have very deep historical roots, and can be considered the last vestiges of the Aramaic-speaking Jewish communities who have existed in Mesopotamia since the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC. Aramaic was originally spoken more widely in the region. The survival of Aramaic among the Jews of the region is due to socio-linguistic and geographical factors. Aramaic became an emblem of identity of the Jewish communities among the Kurdish and Arabic-speaking Muslim majority. Also, the mountainous terrain of much of the region facilitated the survival of an ancient language island. There is evidence that the Jewish population of the region declined after the 16th century, most likely due to the forcible conversion of some Jews to Islam, especially in the 19th century in some areas. Field workers on the Jewish Neo-Aramaic dialects have gathered a number of oral accounts from older speakers about the recent history of their communities. These frequently talk of migrations around the region, especially from villages into towns. This applies, for example, to the Jews of the town of Sulemaniyya, who originated in villages in the areas where the town was founded in the Ottoman period. The history of the Jews in the region is reflected also by their language. Within the Jewish dialects, migration history is reflected by concentrations of structural diversity of dialects. The greater degree of structural diversity of dialects in Iraq than is found in the dialects of Western Iran, for example, suggests that Iraq was the original heartland of the Aramaic-speaking Jewish population, and that the communities on the eastern periphery in Western Iran were the result of migration from this heartland. In the first half of the 20th century, the Aramaic-speaking Jews of the region, as I've already remarked, lived mainly in towns. Many of these appear to be very old urban populations. Most of the Jewish town dwellers were small traders, goldsmiths, tailors, weavers, and dyers. Some of the traders were shopkeepers, while others were peddlers who hawked their wares around the surrounding countryside. Some of the Jews who remained in villages down to the 20th century, such as the communities of the villages of Betanure, Zakho, and Sandu, were agriculturalists. All the Neo-Aramaic-speaking Jews were bilingual, and in many cases trilingual. In addition to their Aramaic community language, they also spoke the language of the Muslim majority local population. Throughout most of the Nina area, this was Kurdish. In northwestern Iran, it included also Azeri Turkish. Kurdish has had a particular impact on Jewish Nina. The knowledge of the official language Arabic by Aramaic-speaking Jews in Iraq in the 20th century was limited. It is significant to note that in general, the Jewish dialects exhibit a greater degree of convergence with local Kurdish than do the Christian dialects. This is likely to be the result of the fact that the engagement of the Jews in service professions in towns brought about a greater social interaction with a Kurdish-speaking Muslim population than was the case with the Christians, who were predominantly agriculturalists living in villages. The linguistic profile of the Nina dialects spoken by the Jewish and Christian dialects reflects the geographical, historical, and social relations between these two religious minority groups in the region. The fact that there are substantial differences between Christian and Jewish dialects is, as I have remarked, mainly the consequence of geographical and social differences. Typically, Jews were small traders who lived in towns, whereas Christians were agriculturalists and lived in villages. In situations in which Jews and Christians lived in the same town in recent years, such as in Urmi or Sanandaj in Iran or Sulemaniyya in Iraq, the two communities appear to have come together in recent migrations from different locations. The most powerful factor in bringing about the linguistic differences, however, was social. Linguistic change is a spontaneous process which occurs in the period of language acquisition by young children and also during the lifetime of adults. The extent to which change is diffused depends first and foremost on social networks. The extent of the change and the boundaries of its diffusion depends on the tightness of social networks and the group identity of the networks. the fact that the patterns of linguistic change have been so different between the dialects of Jews and the dialects of the Christians reflects the fact that these communities constitute two entirely different social networks and identity groups. These social networks can extend over considerable distances. This is shown by the fact that one finds chains of Jewish dialects spread over a large geographical area that are very similar to each other, and in the same geographical area one finds chains of Christian dialects that are similar to each other but are very different from the Jewish dialects in the same region. The linguistic profile of the dialects show that the social networks incorporate communities that are separated by large geographical spaces. The dialects of the Jews of the towns of Zakho, Dahok, and Ahmadiyya, as you see here, for example, exhibit many similarities, although these towns were separated by several days' journey before the period of modern transportation. The Nina dialects nevertheless exhibit some signs of social contact between Christian and Jewish communities. This is reflected by the phenomenon of shared linguistic innovations in both Christian and Jewish dialects in the same region. The existence of shared linguistic innovations in local subgroups of Nina must reflect aerial contact. Aerial contact between languages arises through bilingualism. This reflects social interaction between the Christian and Jewish Nina speakers, knowledge of each other's language, and a desire to communicate. When Jewish and Christian Nina speakers lived close to each other, there were no difficulties of communication, although their dialects were different. The linguistic differences in their dialects did not lead to mutual incomprehensibility. The Aramaic-speaking Jews and Christians who used to live together as immediate neighbours have reported that the relationship between the two communities was generally very friendly and supportive. A good case study is that of the Christians and Jews of the region of Barwar in the north of Iraq and near the Turkish border. In Barwar, there was a cluster of Christian villages such as Enune, Dure, and Bishmiaye, and one Jewish village called Betanure. The Jews of Betanure were weavers and agriculturalists. The fields of the Jews adjoined those of the Christian villages. When a Christian addressed a Jew or a Jew addressed a Christian, they would use the affectionate term of address, Qariwa, which is used in other contexts to refer to a kinsman or to a best man in a wedding. In Betanure, there was a synagogue that contained a shrine of the prophet Elijah, believed by the Jews to have been built by ancestors according to instructions from the prophet Elijah himself. Jews from neighboring towns and villages used to make pilgrimages to the shrine, pray in it, and offer donations for its maintenance. Christians and Muslims used to kiss the outer corners of the synagogue as a token of deep reverence for the prophet Elijah, and would ask Jews to light candles in the shrine and pray to the prophet Elijah on their behalf. Following the Jewish exodus to Israel in 1951, the shrine was no longer used as a synagogue, yet the ritual of lighting candles in the shrine continued to be performed by local Christians of the Barwar region. One of the Jewish speakers from Betanure was recorded by the Israeli linguist Hezi Musafi, and he describes how Christians and Muslims would come to Betanure on Yom Kippur to hear the intoned prayers of the Jews. Despite the friendliness between the Jews and Christians of Barwar, they still had clearly distinct community identities. This is reflected not only in the linguistic differences between the dialects, but also by the fact that the Jews had a stock of secretive code words which allowed them to communicate with each other in the presence of Christians without Christians understanding them. So, I'll skip over, for lack of time, some of the other things that I was going to say about the relations between Christians and Jews. And perhaps just one of the last things I'll talk about is the relations between the Jews and the Muslims. In general, all of the people, in my fieldwork with the Aramaic-speaking Jews, all of the Jews have told me that there were very warm and friendly relations between the Kurdish-speaking Muslims and the Jews. I worked with one informant who was he's a Jewish speaker from the Arbil area, who he said, he used to tell me he had 7 sisters and no brothers. He called himself Shwan. He had his nickname Shwan, which meant a shepherd. And the idea he was a shepherd of his sisters. And then one day when I was talking to him, he said, oh, well, my brother did this, that. And he said, I said, I thought you didn't have a brother. He said, well, no, that's my Muslim brother. When I was a baby, my mother gave me to be suckled by a Muslim woman who was our neighbor. And therefore, I have a milk relationship with him, and he is my brother. That's just one anecdote. And they tell me that when the Jews left in the 1950s, some of the towns, and Muslims would lie in the streets and plead with them not to leave. Lasi in Aramaic, do not go. There were, in the Farahud, that we heard about yesterday in 1941, some of the violence, or some of the violent spirit of the Farahud, which of course was focused in Baghdad, did spread with the reports of it spreading to the town of Sulemaniyya in northern Iraq. However, the Aramaic-speaking Jews I interviewed have said that this was the Jewish community were protected by the local sheikh, who ensured that the protesters in the streets did not come and didn't harm the Jews. So, in conclusion, I've shown in this talk that in the largely oral societies of the Aramaic-speaking Jews in Iraq, one can identify a lot about their history and social relations from a study of the dialects that they speak. The Aramaic language was for the Jews of the region and also for the Christians an emblem of identity that distinguished them from the Muslim population. The Jews and Christians, however, constituted 2 clearly separate identity groups. They, moreover, had separate migration histories. There was close interaction between Jewish and Christian neighbors, between which there was mutual respect and indeed affection, and there was no sense of threat of one group on the group identity of the other. The dialects reflect different degrees of interaction of Jews and Christians with the Muslim majority population. The trading professions of the Jews, their generally urban location, and in many cases their relatively small size of their communities, brought about a closer interaction of the Jews with their Muslim neighbors. The languages and the oral culture of Jews, Christians and Muslims of the region reflect many features of convergence and sharing. In this talk, I've been concerned mainly with linguistic convergence, but it is important to note that much of the folklore, such as folk tales, was shared by the different religious communities. This world of Aramaic-speaking Jews and their Aramaic-speaking Christian neighbors is now severely under threat. As I've remarked, due to emigration of the communities from Iraq last century, many of the dialects of the Jews have now become extinct. Many are now highly endangered. Since this world is largely oral, it is crucially important for scholars to undertake fieldwork and document the dialects while there are still speakers left. Thank you.